So let's unpack this a little bit. And this is the reason why I ask these questions in this kind of order, because I would imagine when you're doing this buy and build focus, you buy the company and you're, XYZ, top line. Okay. And the phase one would be to optimize and expand the, EBITDA margin, right? Certain things, new customers, simplify processes, SOPs in the back line, organic growth, things like that. And then obviously now, like you mentioned, you also have more cash flow, more clay, like in your analogy, clay to work with. Is that correct? Or are you going in with saying, hey, I'm going to go ahead and buy a really good business with already decent sized cash flow so that we don't have to optimize EBITDA too much? It's already already structured that way. And now we can, take that, cash and just roll it back into a lot of the acquisitions.
Going back to my GE days, I would say that I became a typecast as a turnaround guy really quick. But when I'm doing a traditional buy and build, I'll tell you that I think entrepreneurs, PE firms, family offices alike can avoid a whole lot of problems and headaches if they focus on just kind of one rule of thumb: only buy good companies. Only buy good companies with good reputations, with good leadership teams. Companies that are well regarded in the industry. We don't want to do fixer uppers. Let me tell you the why. In a buy and build, so first of all, organic growth and margin improvement are two key ingredients. It's not all about just buying and putting things together and getting bigger that way. You need a balance in growth. There has to be organic, inorganic, to go with the inorganic growth as well. And as you're getting bigger, you want to demonstrate that you can get the leverage and create operating leverage by getting bigger and lowering your cost structure. So all of these things conspire into what I call my perfect recipe for a buy and build. Is I'm trying to get to a 30+% compound annual growth rate, and I want to hold it for an extended period of time. Because if I can get there, my company will double in size in 2.8 years. It'll triple in size in 4.2 years. It'll quadruple in size in just over 5 years, which is the typical, hold period for a PE firm. And, if I can quadruple a business in 5 years, I'm guaranteed about a 4x to 5x multiple of invested capital, which is my career batting average. But going back to your question, if I think of private capital and private equity and the $6 trillion in assets under management and the thousands of firms that are out there, I think of it like a pyramid. As I'm buying companies that are small, they make up the base of the pyramid. I'm paying a low multiple because there's so many of them. In the United States alone, there's 33 million small companies. On the planet, there's only 3,000 that have $1 billion in revenue. So 33 million just in our country, small ones, make up 99.9% of all companies in the U.S. They employ 50% of the U.S. workforce. And yet there's only 3,000 companies at the top that have $1 billion in revenue. But what does that say? Small companies are not rare. Big companies are very rare. And so when I'm doing a classic buy and build, I'm going to make my money on just sheer multiple arbitrage. My last Empire build, I bought 23 companies. I paid 5 times on average each. I leveraged 100% debt. I sold it then for 14 times. So for every dollar of EBITDA that I bought, I paid $5. And for every EBITDA I then sold, I got 14. So I'm making $9, on that transaction through that arbitrage. And I'm buying hundreds of millions of dollars in companies, and so the nature of arbitrage and multiple expansion is going to provide all the return I need. I don't need to make life difficult by buying a bunch of bad companies and trying to get embroiled in fixer-uppers. I can tell you that when a management team makes the mistake and makes one bad acquisition, I've seen one bad acquisition derail a management team for 3 years or more. My last Empire, 23 companies, I had one bad apple. One bad apple, less than 5% of my revenue, caused me about 80% of my headaches for the first 3 years of that buy and build. Ultimately, it worked, great outcome. But at the end of the day, it's like if we just focus on being very disciplined up front, knowing what good looks like, having a really good profile, having a really good strategy. And I buy nothing but good companies with good entrepreneurs, and I combine all of these good assets. Tough enough to buy a bunch of companies and put them together when they're all good. Imagine the headache, when there's bad apples or bad actors in there. And I tell people it's like sometimes I feel like I'm a den mother. So the last company I built, 23 entrepreneurs joined my merry band of brothers. These are people that I all just gave a wheelbarrow full of gold to. They've never had a boss before, and I've got to get them all singing kumbaya around the same fire and marching in the same direction. And I aligned them by making them all rollover investors in the mothership. But still, there's so much complexity just in doing a buy and build, even with good companies, that I don't want to add complexity by trying to find fixer-uppers or good deals. I want good companies. I'll pay fair market price, and I'll let the arbitrage of getting bigger deal with the creation of my value, the value creation.
Oh, I get where you're coming from. So when you go to the negotiating table with these companies and looking to buy these companies, you're saying, hey, you know what? We're not going to, nickel and dime these people, because at the end of the day, I'm making more money on the arbitrage, on the back end, on the exit, and so forth. And the things that you can bring to the table in regards to, margin optimization, SOP, structure, business scale, all that stuff, and building this, you get a lot more money on the back end than nickel and dime. And it's like, hey, we'll come in here, buy a good business, and then as well as, for a fair market price, like you mentioned. I want to ask you this, because the importance of, not only are you buying the systems and the process and the product itself, but you're also buying the talent, right? Human capital, and the importance of both at the same time. And what I'm intrigued with, I've heard some horror stories where they have this amazing product, they're buying the IP of it, but the culture was not aligned with their culture of the company, right? And there's this massive mismatch. And like you mentioned, you see some companies where they acquire this at a very, very large, large debt, kind of play out. And the thing is it just doesn't play out the way they thought it would, because of the culture mismatch.